Of trouble, I discovered the bicycle dynamo. I'd always seen them on bicycles, the way they were attached to the wheel, like a tiny metal bottle, but I'd never paid them much attention. But one evening, my father's friend rode up to our house on a bicycle with a lamp powered by a dynamo. As soon as he hopped off the bike, the light switched off. "What made the lamp go off?" I asked. I hadn't seen him turn a switch. "The dynamo," he said. "I stopped pedaling." Once he went inside to see my father, I jumped on his bike to try it myself, to see if I could make the lamp work. Sure enough, after a few meters of pedaling, the light came on. I got off, flipped the bike over, and traced the wires from the lamp all the way down to the rear tire where the dynamo was attached. The dynamo had its own metal wheel pressed against the rubber. Turning the pedal with my hand, the tire spun round and also spun the wheel of the dynamo. Then the light came on. I couldn't get this out of my head. How did a spinning wheel create light? Soon I was stopping everyone with a dynamo and asking them how it worked. "Why does the light come on when you pedal?" I'd ask. "The dynamo is rotating, that's why." "I know it's rotating, but why does it work? What is the secret?" "I don't know." "Can I play with it?" "Help yourself." I spun the wheel and watched the light. One day, while playing with my father's friend's bike, I noticed the wires had come loose from the bulb. With the wheel spinning, I accidentally touched the end to the metal handlebar and saw a spark. This gave me my next idea. One afternoon, Jeffrey and I borrowed that same bike, flipped it upside down, and connected the wires to the positive and negative heads on a radio where the batteries would normally go. When we cranked the pedal, nothing happened. I then attached the wires directly to the base of the dynamo's bulb. This time, when I pedaled, the light flickered on. Taking the batteries I had removed from the radio, I stacked them together and ran a separate wire from the batteries to the bulb. Again, the light worked. "Mr. Jeffrey, my experiment shows that the dynamo and the bulb are both working properly," I said. "So why won't the radio play?" "I don't know," he said. "Try connecting them there." He was pointing toward a socket on the radio labeled AC. And when I shoved the wires inside, the radio came to life. We shouted with excitement. As I pedaled the bicycle, I could hear the great Billy Kaunda playing his happy music on Radio 2, and that made Jeffrey start to dance. "Keep pedaling," he said. "That's it, just keep pedaling." "Hey, I want to dance too." "You'll have to wait your turn." Without realizing it, I'd just discovered the difference between alternating and direct current. Of course, I wouldn't know what this meant until much later. After a few minutes of pedaling this upside-down bike by hand, my arm grew tired and the radio slowly died. So I began thinking, what can do the pedaling for us so Jeffrey and I can dance? The dynamo had given me a small taste of electricity, and that made me want to figure out how to create my own. Only 2% of Malawians have electricity, and this is a huge problem. Having no electricity meant no lights, which meant I could never do anything at night, such as study or finish my radio repairs, much less see the roaches, mice, and spiders that crawled the walls and floors in the dark. Once the sun goes down, and if there's no moon, everyone stops what they're doing, brushes their teeth, and just goes to sleep. Not at 10 p.m. or even 9 o'clock, but 7 in the evening. Who goes to bed at 7 in the evening? Well, I can tell you, most of Africa. Like most people, my family used kerosene lamps to find our way at night. These lamps were nothing more than a Nido-powered milk can with a cloth wick filled with fuel and bent closed at the top. The fuel was very expensive, and the only place to buy it for a good price was at the petrol station in Tantama, 7 kilometers away. The lamps produced thick black smoke that burned your eyes and made you cough. Of course, you can buy hurricane lamps made with glass and a top that prevents the smoke from coming out, but most people can't afford these. Our country's power is supplied by the government through the Electricity Supply Corporation of Malawi, ESCOM, which produces electricity using turbines on the Shire River in the south, another object of my fascination that I'll describe later. If you have money and a lot of patience, you can ask ESCOM to bring electricity to your home by wire. You have to catch a pickup to Kasanga, then a minibus 100 kilometers to the capital Lilongwe, where you'll find the ESCOM office in the Magetsi house. There, you pay someone thousands of kwacha, submit an application, Draw them a map of your home so they can find it. And if you're lucky, your application will get approved and the workers will find your home and install a pole and wires, all of which you must pay for. When the power is finally on, you're happy staying up until 10 o'clock dancing to your radio, but only until the government issues power cuts, and those happen every week, usually at night, just after dark. All that money and trouble, and it's almost easier just going to bed at 7. Another thing that contributes to our energy problem is deforestation. As my grandpa told me, the country was once covered in forests with so many trees the trail grew dark at noon. But over the years, the big tobacco estates had taken much of the wood, using it to flue cure the leaves before bringing them to auction. Local tobacco farmers used more wood than to build shelters for drying the leaves, but these structures never lasted more than a season because of the termites. The rest of the wood got used by everyone else for cooking since we had no electricity. The problem got so bad near Wemby that it's not uncommon for someone to travel 15 kilometers by bike just to find a handful of wood. And how long does a handful of wood last? Few people realize this, but cutting down the trees is one of the things that keeps us Malawians poor. Without trees, the rains turn to floods and wash away the soil and its minerals. The soil, along with loads of garbage, runs into the Shire River, clogging up the dams with silt and trash and shutting down the turbine. Then the power plant has to stop all operations and dredge the river, which in turn causes power cuts. And because this process is so expensive, the power company has to charge extra for electricity, making it even more difficult to afford. So with no crops to sell because of the drought and floods, and with no electricity because of clogged rivers and high prices, many people feed their families by cutting down trees for firewood or selling it as charcoal. It's like that. One of these government power lines that serviced the nearby tobacco estates also connected to Gilbert's house. Since his father was Chief Wemby, they could afford the poles and wires. When I was young and first visited Gilbert, I watched him walk inside his house and touch the wall, and when he did, the bulb came on, just by touching the wall. Of course, now I know he just simply flipped a light switch, but after that day, each time I visited Gilbert and watched him touch the wall, I thought, why can't I touch the wall and get lights? Why am I always the one stuck in the dark, searching for a match? But bringing electricity to my home would take more than a simple bicycle dynamo, and my family couldn't even afford one of those. After a while, I kind of stopped thinking about it altogether and focused on more important things. One of them, for instance, was graduating from primary school. In mid-September, our teachers at Wemby Primary finally passed out our final exams and wished us luck. For the past several months, I'd studied very hard. I stayed up late with a kerosene lamp reviewing exercise books dating back several years because the Standard 8 exam covered everything. I pored over my lessons in agriculture, remembering the proper land preparation techniques for ground nuts, the various types of farm records, and how to tell if your chickens had been stricken with Newcastle disease or fowl pox. In social and environmental science, I reviewed the roles of civil servants, politicians, and traditional authorities in the district administrative structure. Chichewa lessons were simple, so I spent much of that energy studying English, writing sentences and going over stories from my readers. One of my favorite stories was Journey to Malkwawur, about a boy named Yembi Dodo who's out hunting birds one morning when he's abducted by space aliens. The creatures are taller than the highest trees and wider than an elephant. Each has 3 eyes. Anyway, they take him aboard their spaceship and then eat his birds. I couldn't imagine such a thing. The test lasted 3 days, with social studies and English on the first day, Chichewa mathematics on the second, and primary science on the third. The 3 days swept by in a blur of black and white pages, broken pencils, and strange test question scenarios. I bit my nails over percentage and equilateral triangles, circumferences, and whether to apply iodine or amprol if I found bloody layers in the hen house. By the end, I was a total mess of nerves, but felt confident nonetheless. Our grades would be posted in December, 3 long months away. If I passed my exam, I'd finally be allowed to enroll in secondary school, chosen by the government. Out of 6 possible schools in the area, only 3 were boarding types. Everyone knew the government gave its best funding to the boarding schools, so naturally, Every serious student wanted to go there. I thought it would be incredible to live on my own out of school. But no matter where I was assigned, classes would begin in January. When they did, it would be like passing over an important threshold in becoming a man. Secondary school wasn't free, so very few Malawians even bothered attending. My older sister Annie had not gone to secondary school in Mathama, but had not only gone to secondary school in Mathama, but was halfway finished. I was terribly jealous of her, but now my time would come, and to me, this would usher in another important milestone for once. I could finally ditch the schoolboy short pants of primary school and walk in trousers. After I finished the exam, I waited outside for Gilbert. "No more short pants for us, my man," I said. "For sure, and our mornings are now free until we start school again. What shall we do?" "Let's go hunting. It's been too long." "Yeah, for sure." As much as I enjoyed my break from school, holidays weren't as much fun as the older I became. There was always a lot of work to do on the farm, and my father needed my help. In addition to clearing the land and the ridges for the maize seeds, September was also when we prepared our tobacco for planting. Even more than maize, the tobacco seedlings required extra love and care to help them grow strong. As I mentioned, the tobacco seedlings are first grown in nursery beds down at the dynamo, where the soil is extra fertile. Now that I was out of school, it was my job to return there each day and water the young plants from the stream, taking care to give each one the same amount of drink so it could defend itself against the sun. I would do this until December, when we uprooted the plants and transferred them to our fields. One day in late September, after knocking off work at the nursery beds, Gilbert and I had gone to the trading center for a few games of bawo. Walking back to his house, I noticed something odd. About a dozen people were gathered in his yard under the grove of blue gums, talking in low voices and looking quite serious. Some men were mixed in the crowd, but mostly they were women. Their heads were wrapped in bright-colored impangos. Each carried empty baskets. Gilbert didn't seem surprised to see them, and I asked him who they were. "Villagers," he said. "They're running out of food in the bush, so they've come to ask my father for handouts, or ganye. Some of them have walked for days to get here." Ganyu was piecework or day labor, and this was how many of the men in Malawi survived the hungry seasons when their food supply was low. Even my father had done ganyu in the tobacco estate, digging ridges in exchange for a few kilos of maize flour. You could usually depend on the estates in the area for ganyu to get you through, which is why it confused me to see people here. I asked Gilbert, "Why can't they just work over there?" "They've tried," he said, "but this year even the estates have nothing extra." "So what's your father going to do?" "He's going to feed them," he said. "He has no choice. He's their chief." It was true, the maize crops in the outer villages had fared more poorly than ours during the floods and drought, and after only 4 months their storages had gone dry. Soon the chatter at the trading center was that all of us were running out of food. One day, while buying salt for my mother at Mr. Banda's shop, I overheard him talk about the scarcity. Each June after the harvest, Mr. Banda visited several villages between here and Kasungu and bought many kilos of maize to sell during the hungry season, usually for a much higher price, but this year the silos were empty. "I went to Masca and couldn't buy a thing," he said. "I even found nothing at Chimbia, and they usually have plenty. I couldn't believe what I was seeing." I told my father what was happening at Gilbert's house and what Mr. Banda had said. He said he was already aware of this and that we shouldn't worry. Usually during the hungry season, people could go to the Big Press Agriculture Estate nearby and buy some maize. They grew their own food and made money each year by selling off their surplus. I told him I'd heard people in the trading center saying even the press was empty. "Well, the government keeps a surplus," my father said. "If there's nothing at press, the government will take maize to the ADMARC and people can buy it there." ADMARC is the Agriculture Development Marketing Corporation, a government company that sold maize on the market it could go for a few kilos at a decent price. "Don't let those people worry you, son," my father said. "Whatever the case may be, we've never gone hungry." But one afternoon in late September, my father came home and I overheard him talking to my mother. He'd just returned from the rally in the trading center called by the opposition Malawi Congress Party, the party of President Banda, Farmer Number 1. Hundreds had attended, and the opposition officials had stood on the stage and delivered a boiling speech over a PA system. Some of President Maluzi's thugs, called the Young Democrats, had tried to stop the rally, but farmers from the village stood guard around the stage and let the opposition speak. These men delivered some terrible news. A few months before, President Maluzi's people had sold all our surplus grain for profit. Much of it had gone by lorry over the border to Kenya. In addition, millions of kwacha were missing, and no one in the government was taking responsibility. They're saying there's nothing extra, my father said. This year will be a disaster for us all. We can only trust God, my mother said. What really happened was this. The floods and drought the previous year had given us a food deficit far greater than people realized. In addition, the international community, namely International Monetary Fund and World Bank, had pressured the government to pay off some of its debt by selling off a portion of our grain reserve, since holding on to it was getting expensive. But some individuals and governments sold all of it instead, without keeping any for emergencies. Where it all went, no one knew. Some said it went over the border to Kenya and Mozambique. Others said a large portion had been taken to Admark like usual, but the corrupt officials there hoarded it for too long and it spoiled. Much of the good maize was sold to prominent traders with government connections, men who'd foreseen the food shortage and wanted to take advantage of this dire situation. They would wait until no man or woman had any food at all and then increase the price by 100%. My father was right. We were headed for disaster, but even he didn't know how bad it would get. Just as I expected, the price of maize started going up the first week of October from its normal seasonal price of 150 kwacha a pail to 300. And when this happened, people began searching for other food. One afternoon before supper, my stomach was already growling, so I went to see if my neighbor, Mr. Mwali, had any ripe mangoes in his trees. When I arrived, Mwali and his family were sitting down to eat. Ndima Lima, I said. I found food. Good timing, eh? Just as I said that, I noticed they were eating stewed mangoes with their pumpkin leaves. The mangoes were still unripe, green in color, and probably very sour. They were not ready to be eaten. You say Ndima Lima, Wally said, laughing, but as you can see, we're eating the mangoes as Sima. You found no food here. Later, I saw a line of men I didn't recognize digging ridges in Wally's fields. They were from other villages, the same people who were gathering at Gilbert's house. When they left a few hours later, each of them carried a handful of those green, unripe mangoes as payment. Walking through the trading center a few days later, I noticed something else I'd never seen. Several market women had spread out plastic tarps on the road and were now selling gaga. Gaga are the clear-colored husks or chaff that are removed from the outside of each maize kernel. Normally, these husks are separated at the mill, then thrown away or sold as animal food. For me, they were the perfect bait for my bird traps. Gaga are also used to make cachaço liquor that Grandpa loves so much, and many women even burn it as firewood. I'd heard of very poor people eating gaga when times were tough, but it has so few nutrients that it isn't considered proper food. We feed gaga to our chickens and buy it. And to buy it, we have to scoop it off the floor of the mill ourselves. But now, with maize selling for 300 kwacha a pail, I saw giant sacks of gaga being sold for 100, 10 times what it had cost a month earlier. People were crowded around, raising their metal pails, practically shoving one another to get it. Move away, I was first here. We're all hungry, sister. There are no firsts in that. Down the road, it was the same story. When I returned an hour later, all the gaga was gone. Right then, a kind of shock went through me, like someone shaking me awake in the middle of the night, and I began running home. For months, my mother had been cooking our meals as if things were normal. My sisters and I got our bowl of maize porridge each morning before doing our chores. Lunch and supper was sima with mustards or beans. And of course, at age 13, I had the appetite of a fat politician and always stacked my plate with as much as possible. Sure, I'd been aware of the drought and poor harvests and news from the opposition, but it was as if the troubles were happening to someone else. A little more, I'd say at supper. That's right, keep it coming. But after seeing people fighting for gaga, it was like my eyes had been opened wide and a great fear had made its way in. As I ran down the trail toward my house, I felt it grow inside me like a fist around my stomach. Once I stopped at the storage room door, it tightened its grip. Out of the 5 bags we'd filled with grain, only 2 were still there. In my mind, they were already gone. Staring at the sacks, I tried to imagine how much flour we'd get before all the grain was gone. 2 bags equaled 6 pails. 1 pail equaled 12 meals for my family. meaning 6 pails equaled 72 meals for 24 days. I then counted how many days before the next harvest. More than 210, and at least 120 before the green Dow cobs would be mature enough to eat without making us sick. 210 days until food, and we hadn't planted one seed. When we did, there was no guarantee it would even rain or that we'd get fertilizer. As of now, we were going to run out of food in less than a month, and I had no idea how we'd survive after that. The next time my mother returned from the mill, our flour was coarse and filled with gaga. Everyone began milling their grain this way just to get a little extra. A few days later, I saw my father rounding up our goats to sell in the market. Like many people in Malawi, our livestock was our only wealth and stature on this earth, and now we were selling it for a few pails of maize. The men who ran the Kenyenya barbecue stands were very powerful now, and that meant they could reduce the prices however low they wanted. One of the goats was Mankalala, a small male with long horns who'd been a favorite of mine. He let me grab his horns and wrestle, and sometimes even gave Kamba a good chase just to humor him. Papa, why are you selling our goats? I like these goats. A week ago the price was $500, now it's $400. I'm sorry, but we can't wait for it to go any lower. Mankalala and the others were tied by their front legs with a long rope. When my father started down the trail, they stumbled and began to cry. They knew their future. Mankalala looked back as if telling me to help him. Even Kamba whined and barked a few times, pleading their case. But I had to let them down. What could I do? My family had to eat. In early November, I started waking up as usual at 4 a.m. to go make ridges in the fields. One morning, as I waited in the yard for my mother to prepare my porridge, my father stepped out into the darkness. No fala today, he said. Huh? It's time to start cutting back. We need to stretch out what we have. We had less than 2 bags of grain in the storage now, so I knew there'd be no porridge for tomorrow or the day after that. Breakfast was the first to go, and I wondered what was next. Instead of complaining or asking pointless questions, I took my hoe and headed for the fields to meet Jeffrey. When I arrived, I told him about skipping breakfast. Can you believe it? I said. You're just starting that today? He asked. It's been 2 weeks for us. I'm getting used to it. At 4 a.m., the weather was cool, and I could dig my ridges with great energy. My stomach must have also been fooled from last night's sema, because I had yet to wake up and grumble. But by 7 a.m., it was clawing and screaming to be filled, and the blazing sun was sucking all my strength. I took off my shirt and wrapped it around my head, but the extra weight of it made me more tired. The only thing keeping me from falling over was my father stomping past. Make those ridges better. I'm hungry, out of strength. Think about next year, son. Try your best. I looked down and saw my ridges were small and uneven, as if they'd been dug by a slithering snake. Across the field, my cousin swung his hoe, covered with sweat and breathing heavily. Mr. Jeffrey, I said, you dig my ridges today, and I'll dig yours tomorrow. Can we make this deal? He didn't look up. I'll think about it, he said, gasping, but it sounds like the same deal as yesterday. I was trying to joke and raise his spirits, because lately I was feeling bad for him. Ever since his father died, Jeffrey hadn't been the same. Sometimes Jeffrey forgot things, or he would drift off into space. When I was telling him something of great importance, no doubt. Other times he just stayed in his room for a couple of days and didn't talk to anyone. He hadn't been feeling well, and on a trip to the clinic recently, he'd been diagnosed with anemia. I later discovered that fala wasn't the only thing they weren't getting at home. Food was running low all around. I'm joking, I shouted. Seriously, you don't look good, man. Maybe you should take a break. Don't work so hard and get some rest. I have no choice, he said, swinging the hoe. You know my deal. Even worse, with the recent troubles, I was pretty sure Jeffrey wouldn't be returning to school in the upcoming term, now just over a month away. His mother already struggled to pay his student fees, but now she needed him and his brother Jeremiah to work and provide food. I didn't want Jeffrey to know that I knew this, so I kept up our usual banter going. Soon your man Kamkwamba will be in secondary school where he belongs, I said, wearing trousers and walking tall. He'll find us there, Jeffrey said, smiling. The older boys have big plans for Kamkwamba. What if he goes far away to a fine boarding school such as Kasungu or Chayamba? We'll find him. We have our ways. You can't touch him. Oh, you wait and see. Jeffrey wasn't the only one who was changing. Ever since the bad harvest, Kamba had gotten a bit slower. I hadn't realized it, but he was already an old dog when he'd first arrived with Socrates, having lived out his better years on the tobacco estate where life was good. Life in the village was much tougher, and despite the food I was feeding him each night after supper, I'm sure it wasn't enough. As Kamba got slower, the mice began to outwit him in the fields, and the younger, faster dogs snatched up the better scraps from the rubbish piles. His thin frame got thinner, and I noticed he was sleeping more. He no longer chased the chickens, choosing instead to doze in the shade behind my room. One night, when I tossed up a ball of sema for him to catch, he misjudged the fall and the food landed on his head. "What's the problem, old man?" I teased. He leaned over and sucked the food in 1 second flat. Some things didn't change. Every morning, as Jeffrey and I returned from the fields, we passed more strangers wandering the roads looking for Ganyu. They came from Nchisma, Mutadama, and from the villages deep in the hills. Many carried their hoes over their shoulders with mpango bundles that held a cooking pot and some extra clothes. In normal times, my mother would have taken our grain to the maize mill and grind it herself. She kept baskets upon baskets of flour at home, so we always had what we needed. But as maize ran out all across the region, people started buying flour in 1 kilo or half-kilo measurements. The small portions came in small blue plastic bags and were known as wakma, named after the portable cassette players because they contained only enough food for one person. Walkman was for city people, not farmers and their families. By now, mangoes were out of season and gone, so many men also worked in exchange for a few leaves of cassava or manioc. This plant is a root vegetable whose leaves can be stewed like spinach or rape and whose tubers can be dried and pounded to flour. Cassava is quite popular in other parts of Africa, especially Congo, but in Malawi, cassava was like gaga, rejected in better times when there was plenty of sema. "Ganyu for Walkman, Ganyu for cassava," the travelers now cried. Many people were headed to our district to find work on the estates, but little did they know, most of the estate employees were hanging around in the market, out of jobs, hoping for miracles. "Excuse me," the outsiders would ask, "where can I find Estate 24? "Don't bother, friend," the workers answered. "There's nothing, and I should know. I work there." As the hungry Waganyu made their way through the markets, they passed by the homes of wealthy traders, whose windows released the smells of stewed chicken and sema at lunchtime, as if the belly of the world wasn't howling to be filled. Because so many farmers were selling off their animals, chicken was practically free for people with money. While the men looked for work, their wives and children gathered at Gilbert's house hoping for a handout. About 40 arrived each morning, and hundreds of others passed through since the troubles had begun in August. Most stayed long enough to receive a Walkman from Gilbert's mother, while some arrived too weak to continue. They spread their blankets under the trees and cooked their sema, leaving only after they had regained some of their strength. Others collapsed on the road and had to be cared for. The blue gum grove had become a patchwork of Gilbert's family bedding. Around this time, President Malusi was busy traveling the country in his usual fashion, giving out small handouts of money and showing that he was a big man. Massive rallies were held for loyal officials, complete with dances, military parades, and lots of food. Everywhere the president went, he tossed the poor just enough flour or kwacha to make sure they remembered him come election day. I'd seen him at Wimby Primary School in 1999 during one of his whistle-stop tours. There'd been women's choirs and Gulu Wemkulu, with each dancer receiving 50 kwacha notes. The local politicians had also lined up to get their handouts. This was the first time I'd ever seen the president in person. He was bald and fat, and when he stood up and walked to the podium, his short legs seemed mismatched for his round body. He'd said something like, "I'm ashamed to see this school broken in such fashion. We should tear the whole place down and start from scratch, build it again, strong and proud. Teachers' houses also need to be ship-shape, and students need new desks and books." Of course, the crowds cheered and applauded at this, but instead of buying us new desks, he sent men into our blue gum grove to chop down our trees to build them. Even then, there weren't enough. The teachers never got new homes, and the only thing he did for the school building was give it a fresh coat of paint and a new iron sheet for the roof. This was the same president who'd promised that every person in Malawi would get new shoes if he won the election. Well, you can imagine. After the people voted and Maluzu claimed his victory, everyone started asking, "Where are our shoes?" The president went on the radio and said something like, "Ladies and gentlemen, do I look crazy? How can I know the shoe size of every person in Malawi? I never promised shoes." Our president was a funny guy. Despite a growing anger about the missing maize surplus, the government said nothing on the radio, and despite the looming hunger, it offered no solutions. So when President Maluzi announced that he was stopping in Kasungu to appoint a local chief, all the sub-chiefs from the district pleaded with Gilbert's father to stand up and speak on their behalf. Like the president, Gilbert's father was a Muslim, and that could work to his advantage. "You're a good speaker and one of his people," they told him. "You must convince him to save us." The day of the rally, several thousand people stood in the sun, hoping to hear what the president had to say about the crisis. But instead of answers, they got dancing and speeches that dragged on for hours. Speeches about how the president was a great and powerful man, and how he was kind enough to approve new development in the area, such as building new toilets in some villages and digging a few wells. At the time, the president was also chairman of the Southern African Development Community, a kind of social and economic alliance between 15 countries in southern Africa. During his tenure, there had been terrible wars in other parts of the continent, places like Angola, Burundi, Sudan. The genocide in Rwanda that killed more than 800,000 Tutsi had then spilled into the Democratic Republic of Congo and started a war there. Maluzi had even hosted leaders of Congo and Rwanda and Blantyre in an effort to broker peace. Given his good work across Africa, it was confusing why he failed to see our problems here at home. Anyway, after an hour of dancing and singing, it was finally time for Gilbert's father to speak. He left his seat, which was just in front of the president, and stood at the podium before the people. "Your Excellency," he said, turning to face the president, "I'd like to congratulate you not only for what you've done in Malawi, but all across the great continent of Africa. We're hearing all about the things you're doing in Congo and how you've had success. We're very proud of our president, but please understand, we're also at war here in Malawi, and that war is against hunger." He then asked the president to stop funding wells and toilets and use the money to buy grain. Because really, how can you use the toilet if you never eat? The crowd erupted in applause that lasted so long that the next speaker had to stand there and wait until it was silent. When the crowd simmered down, the next speaker only heaped praise on the president, and the audience began to boo and hiss. "Sit down, you have nothing to say," they shouted. "Chief Wemby already spoke for us." "Foolish politician, there's no politics in Sima." Shortly after, when the president got up to talk, several well-dressed officials approached Gilbert's father and asked to speak with him. Knowing the president's habit of giving handouts, the chief became excited, thinking, "They're giving us money. My speech must have worked." About 6 men led the chief behind a building near the stage, and once there they confronted him. "In what capacity were you speaking such nonsense?" one asked, looking very angry. Before Chief Wemby could answer, they knocked him on the ground and began beating him with clubs and batons. After several minutes, the thugs left the chief bleeding in the dirt and slipped away into the crowd. When a friend discovered Chief Wemby a while later, he refused to go to the hospital, fearing the thugs would kill him in his bed. That afternoon, when Gilbert came home, he discovered his father lying on the sofa, unable to move. By that evening, large black and purple bruises were visible all over his chest, stomach, and arms. For the next several weeks, the chief remained on the sofa in bed, trying to recover from his wounds. He then began sneaking to clinics across the district, keeping his whereabouts secret. After many tests and treatments, he never told anyone the results. Fearing Maluzu's people would discover his actions, Chief Wemby suffered in silence. For me, this turn of events was frightening. Our chief was like our father, the man who protected our small area and represented us to the rest of the country. When we heard he'd been beaten, it was as if we'd all been violated, our safety no longer guaranteed. If the government treated our dear leader in such a way, with the hunger bearing down, I wondered if we people would fare much better.